Wacky car designs have always been interesting and funny to me, whether it be the front-engine, front-wheel drive Nissan LMP1 car from 2015, or the 6-wheel rally car that I talked about on this channel a few weeks ago. There's a lot of stories like this, some more intriguing than others, but not too many come from the Indy 500. Sure, there's been some really interesting cars, like the closed cockpit roadster that Junior Johnson entered in 1963, or the concept that Lola made when they tried to return to IndyCar in 2012. They were interesting cars, but none were as batshit insane as this. The Indy 500 in the late 40s was far different than it is now. I mean, that should be expected since it was over 70 years ago, but anyways. The race had been on pause while the US was in the midst of World War II. However, after the war, auto racing was soon to enter a golden age. The formation of NASCAR was already in discussions by 1948, and Grand Prix racing would be united into Formula One just 2 years later. At the Indy 500, however, things were going pretty smooth. It was a time where people were throwing a lot at the wall to see what stuck, so when a 6-wheel car showed up to qualify for the 1948 Indy 500, it didn't dispel that stigma. The man behind the wheel of this radically designed race car was just as interesting as the car itself. Billy DeVore was born in the incredibly small Kansas town of St. John. He was born in September of 1910 and was the son of Earl DeVore, a pre-World War II racing driver who raced in the Indy 500 3 times, where he only finished in the 1927 race. However, tragedy would strike in November of 1928. Earl was on board the SS Venturous alongside fellow Indy 500 racer Norman Bann. On the night of November 11th, 1928, the ship would sink in the ice-cold waters of the Atlantic Ocean. After the capsizing of the ship, it's believed Earl was killed in a shark attack as no remains of him were ever recovered. Billy would follow in his father's footsteps, attempting his first Indy 500 in 1937. Billy was a decent driver, but only finished the race twice before he ran the Curtis 6-wheeler. The car had been built by Pat Clancy, and Billy was selected as a driver. Sadly, the car wasn't very quick, qualifying 20th and finishing 12th 10 laps down in 1948. That would end up being the last Indy 500 for Billy, but not the car. The Curtis 6-wheeler returned for one last hurrah next year at the hands of Jackie Holmes. However, the race ended after only 65 laps when one of the drive shafts failed. And thus ends the story of the Pat Clancy Curtis 6-wheeler, the only 6-wheel car in the history of IndyCar.